The rain hadn't stopped for hours. It fell in sheets against the windshield, the wipers barely keeping up, while Daniel drove down the empty stretch of highway outside his small town. He wasn't supposed to be out this late, but his boss had kept him late at the auto shop, and now it was close to midnight. That's when he noticed it, the faint glow of headlights in his rearview mirror. At first, he thought little of it, but after 15 minutes of steady driving, the same set of lights remained behind him, never passing, never falling too far back. A knot tightened in his stomach. When Daniel finally pulled off the highway and onto the winding back road leading to his house, the headlights followed. He slowed, hoping the car would pass him, but it didn't. Instead, it mirrored every move he made, every turn, every pause, even the slight drift to the right when he avoided a pothole. By the time he reached the long dirt road leading to his driveway, his heart was hammering so hard he could hear it. He grabbed his phone, hands slick with sweat, and dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but her words brought no comfort. She told him that unless the driver committed an actual crime, like ramming his car or trying to force him off the road, there was little they could do. "Just drive home and lock your doors," she said. Daniel almost laughed bitterly. He didn't feel like this was something to brush off. Every instinct in his body screamed that whoever was behind him wasn't just some lost driver. Daniel's driveway stretched nearly half a mile into the woods, unlit and lined with tall pines that blocked the moonlight. As he turned in, the other vehicle did too, its headlights bouncing along the rough gravel path. Panic surged through him. He accelerated, tires spraying mud, until he screeched to a stop in front of his small house. The other car stopped too, its engine rumbling softly in the darkness just a short distance behind him. He wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, but deep down he knew better. He bolted inside, locking the door behind him, then peered through the thin curtains. The car just sat there, idling, headlights pointed directly at his house. Daniel called 911 again, his voice shaking, but the operator repeated the same thing: "Unless they get out or damage property, we can't intervene. Just stay calm." As minutes stretched into an hour, the car never moved, and Daniel realized he was trapped in his own home, waiting for a stranger outside to make the first move. Daniel's phone screen glowed in the dark as he dialed his best friend, Marcus, who lived a few miles down the road. His voice was uneven as he explained the situation, but Marcus, half asleep, tried to calm him. "It's probably some drunk who took a wrong turn," Marcus suggested. But when Daniel said the car had been sitting in his driveway for nearly an hour without moving, Marcus's tone shifted. "Stay inside. Don't open the door. I'm coming over." Relief washed through Daniel, but it was short-lived. The headlights outside suddenly cut out, plunging the driveway into blackness. He held his breath, straining to hear over the steady patter of rain. The silence outside was unbearable, broken only by the hum of his refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall. Then came the crunch of gravel. Slow footsteps. Someone was walking up his driveway. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. He gripped a baseball bat from behind the door and moved to the front window, but the angle was wrong, he couldn't see who it was. His only glimpse was the faint shadow moving past the porch light before disappearing out of view. Daniel whispered into the phone again, his voice almost a hiss. "They're out of the car. They're here." The dispatcher on the other line repeated her rehearsed calm, telling him to remain where he was and avoid confrontation. Daniel slammed the phone down in frustration. He couldn't believe this. Someone was on his property, and yet the police considered it not actionable. His breathing grew ragged as the doorknob rattled gently, as if someone was testing it from the outside. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the house, so sharp and deliberate that it made Daniel flinch. "Open up," a man's voice called out, low and distorted, like it came from deep within his chest. Daniel didn't respond, didn't move, just stood frozen with the bat in his hands. After a moment, silence returned, and the footsteps retreated into the wet night. He waited, listening, then dared to peek through the curtains again. The driveway was empty. The car was gone, his relief lasted only seconds. From the far edge of his yard, just beyond the reach of his porch light, he caught the faint silhouette of a man standing perfectly still among the trees. Not moving, not speaking, just watching. Daniel's heart pounded as Marcus's headlights finally appeared down the road, approaching fast. He blinked, looked back toward the tree line, and the figure was gone. By the time Marcus arrived, all they found were fresh boot prints in the mud leading into the forest. Marcus parked his truck right in front of Daniel's house, his high beams cutting through the rain as he hurried up the porch. He looked exhausted but alert, his hand resting on a flashlight he always kept in his glove compartment. "You weren't exaggerating," he muttered, crouching to inspect the wet boot prints still stamped into the mud. They weren't random, whoever had walked there had been deliberate, circling close to the house before retreating into the woods. Daniel explained everything in a rush, from the headlights tailing him to the shadow at the edge of the trees. Marcus listened, his face tight, then said, "We're not sleeping here tonight." But Daniel resisted. This was his home, his property, and the idea of abandoning it felt like surrender. Marcus eventually relented, suggesting they at least do a sweep of the area together. Armed with Daniel's bat and Marcus's flashlight, they ventured onto the slick grass, following the trail of footprints into the woods. The beam of the flashlight cut across tree trunks, wet bark glistening like pale skin. The footprints led deeper until they suddenly stopped, no drag marks, no turning away, nothing. It was as though the man had simply vanished into the forest floor. They turned back, uneasy, but something was wrong when they returned to the yard. Marcus's truck lights were no longer on. He frowned, pressing the key fob repeatedly, but the truck stayed dark. Then they saw it, the driver's side door was hanging open, swaying slightly in the wind. Daniel felt a cold chill race down his spine. They had only been gone a few minutes, and yet someone had been bold enough to approach the vehicle while they were still nearby. They rushed back to the house and locked every door, every window, their nerves on edge. Marcus paced, muttering that they should both leave and drive to his place instead, but Daniel hesitated. As if on cue, a loud metallic clang rang out from the driveway. They ran to the window and saw the truck's hood had been popped open. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, with his head shrouded under a hood, was leaning over the engine bay, fiddling with something they couldn't see. The porch light barely reached him, but they could hear the sharp metallic clicks of tools. Whoever this was, he knew exactly what he was doing, Marcus cursed under his breath. "He's disabling it. He doesn't want us to leave." For the first time, Daniel saw real fear in his friend's eyes. They both ducked down as the man slowly stood, looking directly toward the house. Even through the rain-streaked window, Daniel could feel the weight of that stare, calm, unhurried, patient. Then the hood slammed shut, and the figure vanished back into the darkness, leaving only the sound of rain and two men realizing just how trapped they were. The silence inside the house was suffocating. Marcus gripped the flashlight like a weapon, while Daniel sat by the window, every muscle in his body coiled with dread. They whispered to one another, debating whether to risk running through the woods to Marcus's place. But Daniel knew it wasn't that simple. Whoever this man was, he was clever and patient. If he could silently approach the truck and disable it without either of them hearing, then he could easily stalk them through the trees. Leaving now would be like stepping into a trap. Then came the sound that froze them both, a faint scraping against the siding of the house. It started near the back wall, a slow dragging sound like metal being drawn across wood. Daniel's eyes darted upward, realizing in horror what it was. Someone was carving into the side of his home. The sound inched closer to the living room window until Marcus flashed his light out, catching the briefest glimpse of the hooded figure. He was pressed close to the wall, dragging a knife along the wood as if marking territory. The man didn't flinch at the sudden light. Instead, he turned his head toward the window, revealing only a glimpse of pale skin and a wide, chilling grin before vanishing back into the shadows. Daniel stumbled backward, bile rising in his throat. This wasn't just intimidation, this was a game, and the man was enjoying it. Marcus tried calling the police again, raising his voice in anger this time, but got the same robotic reassurance. Unless there was an actual break-in, all they could do was monitor the situation. Minutes crawled by, and then the power went out. Every lamp, every bulb, every faint hum of electricity in the house died at once, plunging them into suffocating darkness. The rain outside seemed louder now, the house groaning in the wind. Marcus clicked on his flashlight, but Daniel felt exposed. With the lights gone, they were blind to everything outside, while the intruder had the night as his cover. Somewhere out there, he was moving, watching, deciding his next step. That's when Daniel's phone buzzed. A new text message, from an unknown number: "You shouldn't have brought company." His hands trembled as he showed Marcus the screen. The realization hit them both with brutal clarity: the man wasn't just outside. He knew who was inside, and he had been close enough to see Marcus arrive. The game was escalating, and the walls of Daniel's home were no longer a shield but a cage. Daniel's grip on the bat was slick with sweat, his knuckles aching from how hard he clutched it. Marcus kept sweeping the flashlight beam across the room, checking every corner as though the intruder might somehow already be inside. They whispered plans in the dark, blocking doors with furniture, staying in one room, maybe even trying to run once the rain eased. But deep down, they both knew those were desperate measures. The man outside wasn't rushing. He was methodical. And the longer he lingered, the more he controlled their every move. A sudden crash shattered the silence, a loud metallic bang from the back porch, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Both men jumped. Daniel rushed to the kitchen, Marcus close behind, and flicked the flashlight toward the back door. The glass pane in the center was spiderwebbed with cracks, a boot print pressed into the frame. Whoever was out there had decided it was time to push harder. Marcus swore under his breath, holding the flashlight steady, while Daniel raised the bat high, his whole body trembling. The seconds dragged on. The broken glass glittered in the flashlight beam, rain dripping down the jagged shards. Then, slowly, the doorknob turned. Once. Twice. A long, deliberate rattle, as though the man outside wanted them to hear every twist. Daniel's stomach churned, but he refused to move, glaring at the door as if his defiance alone might hold it shut. Finally, the rattling stopped, replaced by the sound of retreating footsteps across the porch. But instead of relief, a heavier dread settled in. He wasn't giving up, he was circling. Testing. Probing for weaknesses. Minutes later, the intruder's presence shifted to the windows. The beam of Marcus's flashlight caught movement just outside the glass, a shadow gliding past, pausing, then moving again. At one window, Daniel saw a face pressed against the glass for only an instant. Just long enough to reveal wet strands of hair plastered across pale skin and that same chilling grin. Daniel stumbled back, his chest heaving. The man wasn't trying to break in just yet. He was trying to shatter their nerves first, then came the final blow to their fragile control. From outside, through the storm, they heard the unmistakable sound of a shovel scraping against gravel. Marcus crept to the window and froze. Just beyond the porch light, half concealed by shadows, the intruder was digging. The rain poured down on him, mud splashing up his arms as he carved into the earth with steady, deliberate movements. Daniel's heart sank as he realized the awful implication. The man wasn't just scaring them, he was preparing for something far worse. The sound of the whispers grew louder as Daniel stumbled out of the chapel and onto the barren earth of the graveyard. A heavy ash-colored mist curled around the headstones, each marker glowing faintly in the gloom. The soil beneath his boots was soft and shifting, as if the dead were stirring just below the surface. He forced himself forward, though every instinct screamed to run back inside the church. But there was no sanctuary there, not anymore. Behind him, the chapel pulsed faintly like a heart, its stained glass windows glowing with the same ember red as the words that had burned his name. As he moved deeper into the graveyard, he noticed something chilling. Each headstone bore no name, only a faint impression where one should have been, as though the stone itself had been erased. When he leaned closer, however, the surface shimmered, and for an instant he saw his own name etched onto the marker, only to fade again when he blinked. His stomach turned. Were all of these graves his? Or had every soul who entered the chapel eventually become lost here, their names stolen and scattered across endless stones? The mist thickened, and the air grew colder. Figures began to appear between the headstones, pale, translucent shapes dragging themselves upright from the soil. Some were half-skeletal, others still bore fragments of flesh, but all shared one trait: their faces were featureless, blank slates where identity had been erased. They reached toward him with hands like brittle twigs, and though they made no sound, Daniel could feel their intent. They weren't just wandering, they were drawn to him, like moths to a flame. Each step he took, they followed. In a panic, Daniel broke into a run, weaving between rows of graves, but the graveyard stretched endlessly. No matter how far he went, the fog only deepened, the headstones multiplying in every direction. He stopped, gasping, when he reached a mausoleum at the graveyard center. Its heavy stone doors were carved with words he could barely read through the grime: "Here rests the unwritten." His skin crawled. Something inside him whispered that this was where the priest had wanted him all along, where the book had been guiding him. Behind him, the faceless dead closed in, their featureless heads tilting upward as if in prayer. The earth rumbled beneath the mausoleum, and the doors creaked open on their own, releasing a fetid draft of air that smelled of rot and old paper. A staircase descended into blackness. Daniel backed away, but the dead surged forward, pressing him toward the opening. He realized with dawning horror that the graveyard wasn't endless at all, it was funneling him here, into the tomb of the forgotten. He had two choices: descend into the mausoleum's darkness or be dragged there by the faceless dead. The cry rose and fell with the storm, thin and wavering, like a newborn lost in the cold. Daniel's chest tightened every time the sound pierced the night. He knew Marcus was right, that it was bait, but something in him ached to believe otherwise. What if, against all logic, a child really was out there? The thought clawed at his conscience, until he whispered, "We have to check." Marcus grabbed his arm firmly, shaking his head. "That's exactly what he wants. You open that door, and we're done." But the crying grew louder, closer, until it sounded like it was coming from the edge of the porch. The two men stared at the door in silence, their breaths quick and shallow. Daniel felt his resolve cracking. He couldn't bear sitting inside while a child, real or not, was suffering a few feet away. Against his better judgment, he crept toward the door, bat still in hand, and pressed his ear to the wood. The wailing was right there, muffled only by the thin barrier separating inside from out. Marcus cursed under his breath and moved to stop him, but Daniel had already undone the lock. He cracked the door open just enough to peer out. The porch was empty, rain glistening on the wooden boards. The crying had stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. Daniel leaned out a little further, sweeping the bat in front of him like it would ward off the shadows. That's when he noticed it, something small resting on the porch floor. A baby monitor, its red light blinking in the dark. Before Daniel could react, a figure lunged from the shadows at the edge of the porch. The hooded man slammed against the door, forcing it wide open with terrifying strength. Daniel stumbled backward, barely swinging the bat as Marcus barreled forward with the flashlight. The intruder didn't rush inside but instead reached for Daniel with one gloved hand, his grip like iron on Daniel's wrist. For a split second, Daniel saw his face clearly: sunken eyes, wet strands of hair, lips stretched in a grotesque smile. Then, as quickly as he appeared, the man released his grip and retreated into the storm, vanishing beyond the reach of the flashlight. Daniel collapsed onto the floor, clutching his wrist, his chest heaving. Marcus slammed the door shut, bolting it again, his own hands trembling. On the porch, the baby monitor still blinked steadily, its soft static filtering through the rain. The intruder hadn't broken in. He hadn't needed to. He'd just proven he could get to them whenever he wanted. And worse, he was toying with their sense of mercy, dragging them into his game one calculated step at a time. The baby monitor sat on the porch like a curse, its faint static seeping through the walls. Daniel couldn't take his eyes off the door, his wrist throbbing where the intruder had grabbed him. Marcus yanked the curtains shut on every window, muttering under his breath that this had gone far beyond intimidation. "He's coming in," Marcus said flatly. "It's only a matter of time." The word sent a shiver down Daniel's spine because deep down he knew they were true. The man had tested them long enough. They tried calling 911 again, voices frantic, but the dispatcher only repeated the same hollow advice: stay inside, avoid confrontation, wait for officers to patrol the area. But no sirens came, no headlights approached from the highway. The storm had turned the road into a mess of flooding ditches and fallen branches. They were cut off, and the police weren't coming. Daniel felt his stomach twist in despair. Whatever happened tonight, it was on them alone. The first strike came like thunder. A brick smashed through the kitchen window, spraying glass across the floor. Daniel and Marcus spun toward the sound, the flashlight beam darting across the shards as rain and cold wind gushed inside. Almost immediately, another crash rang out, this time at the living room window. The intruder was circling, testing every entry point, breaking their defenses piece by piece. Daniel's pulse raced as he raised the bat, feeling more trapped with every shatter of glass. Then came the pounding at the front door. Heavy, deliberate blows that made the frame groan. The baby monitor still blinked outside, but now it crackled with sound, this time not crying, but laughter. Deep, distorted, and inhuman. The noise filled the house as the pounding grew harder, more urgent. Daniel and Marcus shouted to each other over the chaos, dragging furniture to brace the door, but the hinges shuddered with every impact. It wasn't a question of if he'd break through. It was when, and just as suddenly as it had begun, the pounding stopped. The house fell silent except for the rain and the faint hiss of static. Marcus aimed the flashlight at the door, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. Daniel dared a glance through the peephole, but there was nothing, no movement, no figure, no sign of the intruder. The silence was worse than the noise. Somewhere out there in the storm, the man was moving, planning his next strike. And both of them knew the night wasn't close to over. The silence inside the house was suffocating. Marcus gripped the flashlight like a weapon, while Daniel sat by the window, every muscle in his body coiled with dread. They whispered to one another, debating whether to risk running through the woods to Marcus's place. But Daniel knew it wasn't that simple. Whoever this man was, he was clever and patient. If he could silently approach the truck and disable it without either of them hearing, then he could easily stalk them through the trees. Leaving now would be like stepping into a trap. Then came the sound that froze them both, a faint scraping against the siding of the house. It started near the back wall, a slow dragging sound like metal being drawn across wood. Daniel's eyes darted upward, realizing in horror what it was: someone was carving into the side of his home. The sound inched closer to the living room window until Marcus flashed his light out, catching the briefest glimpse of the hooded figure. He was pressed close to the wall, dragging a knife along the wood as if marking territory. The man didn't flinch at the sudden light. Instead, he turned his head toward the window, revealing only a glimpse of pale skin and a wide, chilling grin before vanishing back into the shadows. Daniel stumbled backward, bile rising in his throat. This wasn't just intimidation, this was a game, and the man was enjoying it. Marcus tried calling the police again, raising his voice in anger this time, but got the same robotic reassurance. Unless there was an actual break-in, all they could do was monitor the situation. Minutes crawled by, and then the power went out. Every lamp, every bulb, every faint hum of electricity in the house died at once, plunging them into suffocating darkness. The rain outside seemed louder now, the house groaning in the wind. Marcus clicked on his flashlight, but Daniel felt exposed. With the lights gone, they were blind to everything outside, while the intruder had the night as his cover. Somewhere out there, he was moving, watching, deciding his next step. That's when Daniel's phone buzzed. A new text message, from an unknown number: you shouldn't have brought company." His hands trembled as he showed Marcus the screen. The realization hit them both with brutal clarity: the man wasn't just outside. He knew who was inside, and he had been close enough to see Marcus arrive. The game was escalating, and the walls of Daniel's home were no longer a shield but a cage. Daniel and Marcus sat slumped against the wall, their chests heaving as the storm raged through the broken door. Every muscle in Daniel's body screamed with exhaustion, yet his mind refused to rest. The man was still out there. The shovel, the baby monitor, the laughter, it all blurred together in a haze of terror. Marcus checked his phone again, praying for bars, but the screen glowed uselessly. No signal. No help. Just the storm and the silence between its crashes. When dawn finally began to gray the sky, the rain softened to a mist, and the house stood in eerie quiet. They moved cautiously, inspecting the wreckage, the shattered windows, the mud smeared across the floor, the overturned furniture. The shovel lay abandoned just inside the door, its edge caked with dirt and splinters. Marcus stared at it, muttering, "He left it on purpose." Daniel felt the truth of that. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a message: "I'll be back." By mid-morning, the police finally arrived. Two cruisers pulled into the muddy driveway, their tires splashing in puddles, their officers stepping out with casual urgency that felt insulting after the night they had endured. They took statements, nodded gravely, and scribbled notes. But when Daniel described the man's face, the baby monitor, the digging in the rain, their expressions shifted from concern to something else: skepticism. "Without a break-in or serious injury, there's not much we can pursue," one officer said flatly. It could have been a transient, someone passing through. Daniel's anger boiled over. He dragged the officer to the porch, pointing at the monitor still blinking weakly, at the deep boot prints in the mud, at the gouges carved into the siding. "Does that look like some drunk passerby?" he shouted. The officer only sighed, promising to keep an eye on the area, before loading the evidence half-heartedly into the cruiser. Minutes later, the cars rolled away, leaving Daniel and Marcus alone again, their house scarred and silent, their nightmare dismissed as an inconvenience. That night, after Marcus finally left to get some rest, Daniel sat alone in the ruined living room, staring at the dark tree line beyond his broken windows. The storm was gone, but the forest was heavy with silence. His phone buzzed on the table. One new text. No number. Just 3 words: "Not finished yet." Daniel's stomach dropped as he looked toward the porch. In the weak moonlight, half hidden among the trees, he saw the faint outline of a man standing motionless, watching, waiting, smiling. The police couldn't help. And deep down, Daniel knew they never would.